Good evening and welcome to the TNT Show. I'm John Drummond and I'm your host for the next 60 minutes. Thanks to you, the TNT Show and Indie Live are growing and delivering more exciting shows than ever before. Of course, you can watch the TNT Show on IndieLive.net. It's streamed out also on YouTube, Facebook, TikTok and Twitter. Plus, if you go to YouTube, you can see all of our previous 160 shows. That's right, we've done over 160 shows. Sometimes it feels like it, I have to say. Now, if you're upset by media coverage of political events where journalism is often junked in favour of stenography or rehashed news releases, if you're looking for an alternative voice, well, you found it. We're here for you. You can be here for us, of course, by supporting our crowdfunder, and I hope you'll do that. Well, it's been another great day for British democracy. The so-called Reform Party has announced its immigration policy. It is as follows, and I read it directly from their website. It says, only Reform UK will, and this is in bold capitals, stop the boats. They're going to stop the boats using a 6-part strategy. You listen to this. 1, they will declare national security threat. Secondly, they will leave the ECHR. 3, 0 illegals will resettle in the UK. 4, there will be a new Department of Immigration staffed by believers. 5, offshore processing centres in British overseas territories. And 6, pick up and take back to France. Now, I don't know what communication they've had with France or the French government or anyone else for that matter. But those are the 6 main policies of the Reform Party. Tonight we'll be talking to 2 more excellent guests, Caroline Coombs and Sarah Douglas from Reunite Families UK. And they're joining us tonight to talk about the plight of families settled by the UK's government's laws on immigration and the fact that these have had the compounded effect of Brexit on those laws and the enormous impact they make on families. Not at all positive. And they'll be taking your questions live. There's still time to put a question, by the way. You'll see the details on the screen. And as you know, TNT stands for The Nation Talks. So in many respects, this is your show. We're live and we're free. So no license, no problem. Now to our guests tonight, Caroline Coombs and Sarah Douglas. Thank you very much for joining us, ladies. How are you? Sarah first.
Hi, great. Thanks for having us.
It's a great pleasure. It's a great pleasure indeed. How are you, Caroline?
I'm very well, thank you. Good to be here.
Thank you very much for joining us. It's the reason we were so pleased to have you on the show was because I've spoken to quite a few people about Reunite Families, and I have to say there's a fair degree of lack of knowledge about what you're trying to achieve. Maybe, Caroline, you could kick off by telling us what Reunite Families UK is all about.
So Reunite Families UK is a lived experience non-profit organisation, and myself and another mum, Jane Yilmaz, set it up as a Facebook group in 2017 after we had been through our own horrendous experiences with the family migration policy. And we discovered we sort of met on a news piece, and we immediately clicked, and we just thought we're not the only ones, and we felt really alone, felt isolated, and so we decided to start a Facebook group. And that was in 2017. In 2022, it became a non-profit organisation, and we've got over 4,000 members that we support and advocate for on their behalf, because unfortunately this is a policy that has been under the radar since it was introduced in 2012, and essentially means that unless you earn a certain amount of money, you cannot be a family here in your own country with your non-British partner. Whether if you're a British citizen or you're a settled citizen, you have to earn a certain amount, and that was placed at 18,600 back in 2012. And in December last year, they intended to increase that massively, doubled it more or less, to 38,700 very quickly in the backlash, but brought it down to 29,000, but which is still a figure that half the population wouldn't earn that amount to be able to sponsor their partner. And what ends up happening is there's a lot of discrimination, lots of lower income families. There are families that are forced into single parent families, younger couples, older couples, people who are caught up in this horrendous and really actually quite unnecessary policy, to be honest, because these are British citizens, they are legitimate relationships, they have children, and if they don't have children, they are a relationship. And actually, most people you speak to, they have no idea this policy exists. And most human logic is, well, what do you mean you can't be here? I've had so many people say that to me in the many years I've been dealing with this issue and affected by it, saying, but you're married, you're a family. Why do you have to do this? And most people can't believe it. And I think for the most part, that is our sort of biggest block, is the lack of knowledge that this actually is a policy, because it gets swept in under this very really awful anti-immigrant sentiment that has just become very poisonous and very, very polarized. And it's not them and using at all, because we absolutely advocate for a humane and safe routes for people to come to the UK. But fundamentally, these are citizens of this country that cannot be here as a family, and that is so beyond acceptable. It's untrue. But
and just for interest's sake, what was the law before 2012, before this was introduced?
So there wasn't a minimum income requirement. You would be able to be here as long as you could show adequate maintenance. You would be able to bring your partner in here. And actually, one of the biggest lies that we have to keep kicking back on is the burden to taxpayer line that comes out, and to justify this policy. And there has never, a partner coming into this country, a migrant coming into this country, does not have access to the public purse. They cannot access it as a condition of their visa. My husband says it on his biometric card, no recourse to public funds. And so the taxpayer isn't getting impacted. And actually, most partners coming in are seeking to contribute. They have skills. They have work in whatever country they're in, and quite often maybe the breadwinner, but what they earn doesn't actually matter.
Let me see if I understand this fully. So your husband has this requirement or this condition attached to his residency in the UK. Does that mean, for example, that he cannot access the NHS?
He can access the NHS because we pay for it.
Oh, you pay for it.
Yeah. So on your first application, well, on every application, apart from your indefinite leave, you will pay what's called a health surcharge, and that has recently gone up from 624 a year to 1,035 a year. And what that basically means is that's your sort of your health insurance, but a lot of people wouldn't usually use that. There might be the odd GP appointment if you can get one, and other than that, you're paying for a service like insurance where you may or may not use it. And actually, what then also happens when your partner is in the country and working, they're obviously paying their income tax and they're paying their national insurance. So they're paying twice into the system, and actually they're paying into the public purse but not able to access it back. So it gets really, really frustrating, and Sarah will say the same, when people will will hear this nonsense being thrown back as MPs will use it as a retort because that's what they're being told.
Sure.
That is the line. Yeah. But actually, the partners coming in are paying quite a lot, and also if your partner does happen to get a good job and whether civil engineers or work that has a decent salary, then they will be paying a very good contribution to the country. But there's also they're deemed as dependents, and it's that sort of they're not dependents. These are adults who are trying to support and want to support their family, and they're actually they're making a big decision themselves to leave their home country to come here to be reunited with their partners and their children, and they want to contribute to society. They want to carry on being that positive contribution, and there's lots of wording and narrative that is used as a way to be able to conjure up a certain ideal of what a migrant is, and across the board in immigration, right? We hear it all the time. Yeah. It's horrendous, and it's got worse and worse.
Yeah.
For the most part, we do get sort of brought in under that hostility, and for partners coming in, it is a horrendous feeling. It is not.
There's a terrible irony here. I want to take a couple of questions very quickly in a second, but the terrible irony is that during the various world wars, the empire told the empire countries that all of them were British citizens and could come here at any time they wanted. So therefore, millions and millions of Indian people took that as gospel and assumed it was true, and then discovered afterwards that things seemed to be changing somewhat. The couple of questions I want to take very briefly before I move on to Sarah, if I may. One question is asking, is there a difference, how are children treated specifically under this legislation? And the question is, let me find it now. The other question is, does married status affect this process? Or I think the expression is, if you're a common law spouse, is that treated differently to someone who's formally married or no? It doesn't discriminate.
So in terms of the married, doesn't make a blind bit of difference. Being married means nothing in this policy.
Really?
No. I was married. Sarah's married. I'm assuming, sorry, that's a huge assumption, but has a partner. But that most of all our members that are married, it really doesn't matter. And if you have children, doesn't matter either. There is just an absolute sweeping through. If you are not, and worse now, as Sarah's experiencing, worse now that we've had Brexit, and it has just literally opened the floodgates of horrendous experiences for both adults and children. And in terms, to answer the question with the children, since 2012, children have been separated from a parent willfully by the government because of this policy for months, if not years. We have got children who have not been living with a parent, usually the father, which has had such adverse effects. We've done on our website. We've got a mental health initial findings report from year one. We published it in December, not long after, very timely after the announcement of the increase. And what you read is heartbreaking. Children who are suffering depression, anxiety, separation anxiety. Stool holding, some having suicidal ideation, passing out. The level of anxiety, it makes me shudder even thinking about it and talking about it, because this is what children are being put through for the sake of what? It's a tiny percentage. When you compare it to the overall migration figures, the percentage is very small of of families coming in. What we don't know is how many are fully affected who aren't able to come in because they're not in a system anywhere. They cannot apply, they do not meet the minimum income requirement, and so they are suffering in silence effectively. And which why when people come and find us, they can't believe that they haven't heard of us, because what they're going through is so devastating that, you know, it's to have a space where they can share how they're feeling is huge. You know, that's one of our main reasons for being, really. But the devastation, and it's going to get worse. And the thing that is, again, it's the new one now, exceptional circumstances. You know, but there is, you know, you have a sign off on a newspaper article, for example, that usually gives the Home Office the last word, and it will either be burden to the taxpayer, which I've talked about in terms of the no recourse to public funds, or it now is there's exceptional circumstances route that they can apply for. Since it was brought in after when a Supreme Court ruling declared that the rules, the policy where children are concerned, where applications for children are concerned, was unlawful, an exceptional circumstances route was quietly put out, I think around July, just before government goes into recess. And actually, to this day, I've very few lawyers will actually know what exceptional circumstances, what the bar is. We just know it's extremely high because we've got thousands of members, and there's so many with children who are still separated. One of our admin, you know, she's got children who've been separated from dad for a few years on and off. They barely, you know, they very rarely get to see him because he lives so far away.
Almost sounds like catch-22. There are exceptional circumstances. However, if you know how to apply for it, you're not exceptional.
It's a bit like the adult dependent route. It's about masquerading as a rule. Like, it's so difficult to get, people don't get them. And so to say there's an exceptional circumstances route, well, yes, there is, but is it accessible? No, it's not. So yes.
Thanks very much, Caroline. You've been very patient, Sarah. I can't turn to you if I may. Tell us your story.
Okay, so I was one of the people that Caroline mentioned that was completely unaware of this family migration policy when it was introduced in 2012 until it directly affected me after Brexit. So I moved to Italy in 2007 and met an Italian man and got married in 2010. We have 3 children. And we'd always planned to move back to Scotland, back to the Scottish borders, when our children reach school age. And now we find ourselves in the situation that we can't. We were working towards meeting the requirements through the savings route. If you don't meet the requirement through your income, you can show that you have adequate savings. And we were close to reaching the target, which is £62,500. And then they announced the increase. So the savings route will go up to £88,500. So it's just moving the goalposts. Now, my family are financially stable. My husband's the main breadwinner, though. So whilst his salary meets the income requirement, mine doesn't. I'm a stay-at-home mum to 3 children, so I work part-time as a teacher, but I don't earn nearly enough to meet the income requirement. And if I were to meet the income requirement, it would mean moving back to the UK without my husband, either leaving my children behind or bringing them with me without my husband to help look after them. So it's we're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place, basically.
Yeah, it's just dreadful. And I mean, some people might be asking, well, how does the UK differ from other countries in this respect? I mean, for example, if somebody was moving from, say, the UK to Italy, would they be confronted with similar restrictions and requirements to meet in terms of financial income, etc., whatever?
Yeah, so in Italy, as far as I'm aware, you can apply for Italian citizenship after being married for 2 years. if you're living in Italy, or 3 years if you're living outside of Italy. So I think there's a language test you have to do, but there's not any income requirement. So basically, because I'm married to an Italian, I'm treated like an Italian citizenship. Even if I don't actually apply for citizenship, I'm entitled to use the healthcare system. I'm entitled to live here and work here. So there's no income requirement whatsoever.
Thank you. Would it be an exaggeration to say that the government has now created sort of second-class British citizens?
Yeah, that's what it
who
feels.
don't get treated the same as other citizens do.
Yeah, that's definitely what it feels like. Yeah, just because I'm married to a foreigner, it feels like I'm being punished, like I'm essentially exiled from my own country. And people say, well, yeah, as a British citizen, of course, you have the right to return. But the only way I can do that now is if I leave my husband.
To split your family.
It's not really a choice. So essentially, it means that I'm exiled. So
yeah, I mean, it's inexcusable, really. So, what can you do? You have to stay in Italy, even though you might want to not to do so at some stage.
Yeah, that's what we're faced with. We could work to meet the savings requirement, which at the moment is pretty hard, and it's going to go up again next year when the income requirement goes up again. To, I think, I haven't figured it out yet. It will be over £100,000 you'll need to have in savings that you need to have in your bank account for 6 months.
So let me get this right then. If I'm a millionaire, I'm not affected by any of this. Is that right?
No.
See, that's outrageous. It's like creating second-class citizens in a multifaceted way. You know, it's based on income. It's based on the fact that you're splitting up. It's just, I mean, what happens when you complain to the government about its behaviour? What reaction do you get? Caroline, maybe you could tell us.
Sorry, I have to slightly chuckle there. You know, unfortunately, because the architects of this policy are currently the government, it's very hard to get much wiggle room at all, but there's not. You know, but there are Conservative MPs who support a fair spouse migration policy that we're pushing for, you know, because family values are supposed to be at the heart of this party. However, it couldn't be any further from family values what's going on, you know, and actually, you know, the second class citizens, absolutely, it's the elitism of it. It's saying that if you earn a certain amount of money, you know, if you're on low income, you're not welcome here with your family. And for people who are hardworking, lower income families, it's a real kick in the teeth to be made to feel that way. And also, you have the discrimination aspect, which I've spoken about. The mothers who are juggling everything, that have had to separate from the partner to be back in the UK, and with the children, are juggling jobs, they're juggling their childcare, which is very expensive as well. The child is losing one parent because one's not even there, and then the other one's working a lot to try and meet these requirements. The visa fees have gone up because, you know, they have. The government are very intent on migrants paying for the immigration routes, but actually what's happening is it's devastating British and settled citizens. And for military families, so the requirement, the minimum income requirement, is lower for military personnel. So it's about 23,000. However, what about those civil servants? Even some of the Home Office staff don't even earn that. NHS staff don't earn that. So it's dividing who's the worthy, worthy of being here.
You mentioned Brexit made a change. Sarah, can I ask you, how did that change impact you? Because I assume that before Brexit, because of the EU laws, that there was compatibility to a large degree. I mean, people moved between countries, and they studied in different countries. They weren't hugely fussed about where they came from.
It never even crossed my mind when I got married to look into immigration policies, because we had freedom of movement. It was no different marrying an Italian to marrying somebody from down the road in Scotland. In my mind, it was not any different. Then obviously that all changed in 2016. But even then, straight after the Brexit referendum, it wasn't clear at first. So in hindsight, we should have moved back then to take advantage of the freedom of movement. But it wasn't clear what the end deal would be. So I was maybe naively optimistic that people in situations like mine would be considered in any deal, that we would be allowed to return. So I was optimistic. So until Brexit actually happened, until the deal was made, I didn't really see myself being in this situation. And then once it was finalised, we were in the middle of the COVID pandemic. So whilst we did have time then that we could have moved, in Italy here, we weren't even allowed to leave our houses. So there was no possibility of moving country at that point. So we really missed the boat.
Maybe all these divisions might turn out to be helpful to you in a strange way. Let me put it this way. Scotland voted against Brexit, as you know. So there's enormous sympathy in Scotland, as you know, for because apart from anything else, the birth rate has gone down. And if the economy is still going to function, Scotland needs lots and lots of people coming in. So they need a diametrically opposite immigration policy to that.
This is the ironic thing.
Yeah, it's terribly ironic. In other words, they need your children.
Yeah. So I heard my MP speaking.
So have you contacted the Scottish Government? Have you been in touch with them, asked the MPs at Westminster to raise this?
So I've contacted many times my MP in the Scottish Borders. He did eventually agree to speak with me, and we had a video call. But he fully supports this this policy, so was not able to help me. And basically, in his mind, since it was my choice to set up my family life in this way, then.
I understand that. I understand which MPs you're talking about, and I would be surprised if they reacted any differently. My suggestion to you, for what it's worth, is write to the First Minister and say, I gather you need more people. I'm in a position to help you, if that's your wish, and see what reaction you get from him, because his background is an immigration-based background. So, you would expect him to be at least understanding, if not entirely sympathetic. Of course, there's a limit to what he can do, because he's not in a position to change immigration policy, but he may be in a position to raise it internally. I don't know. But I suspect it wouldn't hurt. But I leave that thought with you. And also, there's a whole bunch of members of Parliament in Westminster outside the Conservatives that you might want to be in touch with too. Can I ask you a question, Caroline? If there was a Labour government tomorrow, would that help?
It would. Put it this way: immigration is such a polarizing poison chalice, I guess. Nobody's really making, we're struggling to get any confirmation of any manifesto around immigration in terms of family migration. And it's a very difficult topic when you're trying to win votes, right? So we're not sitting back by any stretch of the imagination thinking that when the opposition party, which is likely to happen, does come into power, that is going to change things massively for us. But what we won't have is the architects of the policy at the helm.
Yeah.
And we've been engaging with quite a few MPs across the parties to understand and to educate and inform, and to get support. And there's actually a debate in Westminster Hall on Tuesday the 23rd of April, which Paul Blomfield has organised, which is great because it's putting out there. There's a petition which is, I think, about 67,000, and we need to get 100,000 signatures on that, so that it can push for a parliamentary debate. And we have to keep pushing with Labour, and also providing some insight into what a simpler policy could look like, because you've got the 5-year route and you've got the 10-year route. It works out about £20,000 in total for about a 5-year route, and £34,000 for the 10-year route. It's extortionate.
Yeah,
and there's so much bureaucracy and paperwork involved in that. There's lots of, the different, you've got leave to remain, further leave to remain, and then indefinite leave to remain if you're on the 5-year. Double that, obviously, if you're on the 10-year. And each time you're paying huge fees. You are having to input ridiculous amounts of paperwork, a lot which is repeated as well. So there's a lot of unnecessary, arduous work that the Home Office has to do in order to, give somebody a refusal or a grant a visa, and then that could be simplified a lot more. Lesser, a shorter route for both. Much less paperwork, and actually what we find is the skills that are being lost by the partners not being able to come here, the money that can go into the economy from the partners who are skilled, they just happen to be skilled in another country, coming here to the UK, the skills that can be used here. But on the other hand of that, partners get de-skilled. So depending on what they do in their home country, come here and you'll find a qualified, brilliant teacher is working in a supermarket. And there's nothing wrong with that, but it's about the de-skilling, that the integration is not working. That side of the contributions that we made, and even on application, Sarah's partner his income won't even be considered, irrespective of the skills that he would have and would be able to contribute in this country. It would all be on Sarah's shoulders to.
It's crazy. You might be in a particularly advantageous position, of course, because we have an election coming up, and the UK political parties tend to be notoriously insensitive until there's an election. And probably your best time to reach them is now. I should have thought, because it's very difficult for politicians to say no prior to an election, because who knows it? You never can tell. Right now, it looks as if it's an open and shut case, but it may not be by the time the election happens.
Never say no, right?
And besides, politicians are notoriously apprehensive. When they're in power, they're sort of fairly arrogant, but when they're out of power, they live in tenterhooks. But there's a thought there. Our audience is suggesting you might contact Alison Thulis, who's the SNP spokesperson for Home Affairs at Westminster. If you haven't already done so, they're suggesting that would be a useful thing.
Great. Alison Thulis has been really good. She's been very engaging and does want to know more. And you'll find there are MPs that are like that across the parties, and including Conservative MPs as well. I think the problem is that there is a party line to toe, and especially with elections coming up, you've got that sort of, oh, well, this is what I've been told is the policy, so therefore I'm going to regurgitate that in a copy and paste letter, which is really, really frustrating for families who are trying to engage with their MP. But there are MPs who are trying to make a stand, like Paul Blomfield. Stephen Timms is very vocal on the issue as well, and it's just they are working for their constituents, so they have to. If any constituents are affected, they really must press their MP and say, you're and equally, like with Britons in Europe. They now have the right to vote. Use that vote. Like, if your MP, the MP that would be where you would be living, if they've got any sense, they want to get as many votes as possible. But equally, there is a whole swathe of people now in Europe that are Brits, and they are being told that they cannot be a family in their home country. And if they need to come back for their elderly parents and want to go for whatever reason, they need to be back in this country. They should have the right to do that. Any British citizen should have the right to be here. We have one of the harshest family migration policies in the world. I mean, how we are a country that, when colonized countries, we're like, oh, Britain's here, it's okay. However, don't come here now. The irony is it's actually quite galling when you think about it.
I think you'll probably find all colonial countries operated that way.
Yeah. But it's like shutting down the drawbridge and going, nobody's allowed it.
It's part of the colonial mindset. It's really weird. Sarah, if you could have a magic wand and you could wave it right now, and you're speaking to the audience tonight, folks listening and watching, what would you like to see happen tomorrow morning?
Well, I would like to see the minimum income requirement scrapped completely. I think that being allowed to live in your own country shouldn't be based at all on who you're married to or how much money you earn. So the policy could be changed in different ways to make it easier, but I think it needs to be scrapped altogether. If not that, then they at least need to look at the overall income of the household. So my family, for example, are completely, my husband earns enough that I don't need to work. So we're completely financially stable. We own our own house outright, have plenty of savings in the bank. We're both educated with degrees. So, looking at the overall picture of the family set up to decide whether or not they would be able to support themselves in the UK. But ideally, it should just be scrapped altogether, and parents, British children should be
immigration controls. You're simply saying, let's scrap this particular, noxious legislation.
Yes. Yeah.
Just in case people are thinking that you're arguing in favour of indiscriminate immigration.
No.
Sorry?
I said, heaven forbid, no. Wouldn't dare. But no, and I agree with Sarah. Our members would like to see it abolished completely. We realise the landscape we're dealing with, though. But yes, there needs to be checks. There needs to be security. We do need to make sure that we are kept secure. So of course, to sort of maintain that level of the checks that would need to be done, right? Yeah. But in terms of saying to somebody, you don't earn enough, sorry, door shut, bye bye. Yeah. There's just no justification for it. You kind of think, what? Yeah.
Can I ask you a general question? How do you feel when you watch? Because there's 2 elections this year, at least 2. The UK is going to have an election. I'm told theoretically it could be delayed until January. I just can't imagine any politician in their right mind calling a general election in January. But then again, you never can tell. But there'll probably be 2 big elections this year. There'll be the UK and also the US election. How do you both feel when you listen to people like Donald Trump? Because Donald Trump talks about the border and immigration all the time, and there's a level of rhetoric there which a lot of people find very unhelpful.
Yeah, I think they've created a an image of immigrants that is not related to the reality at all. They make them the scapegoats just to deflect from what is actually causing the issues in our country, and people fall for it. I'm not entirely sure why. It seems fairly obvious to me that that's what's happening. And it's really, it can be dangerous to immigrants in the way that they're treated, from situations like mine that we're just not allowed to return home, to actual more serious situations where you find immigrants being harmed, or victims of hate crimes and things like that. So it's a really, really hostile environment, and even worse for people that are from the global south. So I feel myself very lucky that people are more likely to listen to my story because I'm Scottish and because my husband's Italian. Other people don't get the same sympathy, unfortunately.
Don't you feel there's a terrible irony here? If you look at the UK, and if you landed here as somebody from Mars, let's say, and you looked at the UK and you say, hold on a second, the Prime Minister, his family must have immigrated. You look at the First Minister of Wales and the First Minister of Scotland, and you could come to the same conclusion. Northern Ireland might be slightly different, but that's the reality of it. Isn't there a terrible irony that the UK, despite being led by people who you would think on the face of it might be sympathetic, in fact has gone exactly the opposite way, which is, well, perhaps not in Scotland, perhaps, and maybe worse, but certainly there's that tendency to say, immigration is bad, and then everybody gets wrapped up in that sort of cliche, if I can call it that. I know some people don't regard it as a cliche, but I think most intelligent observers would say it's a cliche. These people like Trump don't rely upon facts; they rely upon emotion in order to grub for votes.
I can't say the word, sensationalism, and inciting hatred, and that anti-immigrant sentiment. I mean, it's toxic. It's really frustrating as well that a person who is compassionate to other human beings, and that we live in a world where there should be equal opportunities, and that everybody ultimately wants the best quality of life they can possibly get for them and their families, right? It's the way that we're built. And this shutting down of doors, ironically, by home secretaries and home office, like the departments run by people who at some point, parents, grandparents, great grandparents would have been able to come into the country, and they themselves are shutting down the doors. And in terms of the way that this hateful rhetoric, this narrative that, like Sarah said, it's diverting people from other things that are going on. But these are by and large vulnerable people, or they're good and good people who are in whatever situation they're in and trying to get here. Yes, I don't argue that there are economic migrants, but fueled by the same desire to have the best quality of life they want. And this sort of protectionism is so toxic, and stay out. It's just, but apparently I'm woke, or I'm a lefty liberal because I'm thinking that, and I'm like, God,
well,
really? Is this where we've come to?
Let me reassure you, it's not about being woke. One of the American founding fathers, a guy called Alexander Hamilton, upon whom the musical is based, was traduced because he was a foreigner. He wasn't born in the United States, even though he was instrumental in setting up the United States. And he was exposed to the most vituperative criticism, about the fact that his parents weren't married and all this sort of stuff went on, and the fact that he was from the Caribbean, and it just went on and on and on, and it lasted for years, and until eventually he was killed in a duel, but with a guy who eventually became president. But I mean, there's nothing new about this. We're talking 1800 now, so it's always been a dog whistle when people run out of ideas about being positive. They tend to fall back on this. It's very sad to see it now, I have to say, because I thought we'd grown up. I thought we'd gotten beyond all this nonsense. But it seems to be, they used to say that patriotism was the last refuge of the scoundrel. It now sounds like it's immigration is now second in that category. People might be wondering, how are you funded? Sarah, can you tell me how Reunite UK Families is funded? Where do you get your income from?
So I'll answer that question. Okay, so we are funded by Justice Together Initiative and also Paul Hamlin Foundation, and we have a small bit of funding from Unbound Philanthropy. And we do get some donations through as well through our website, which is great. And we are actually we have got someone who's very grateful for the funding that we've got, but we are barely funded really. We punch way above our weight for the money that we are able to access, or that we are accessing at this time, and a lot of love and dedication and passion is put in for free because it matters too much. It can't be that a British or settled citizen has to separate and cannot be a family, be a loving couple in this country. How we've got here is crazy. The fact that I'm having to justify it in any way is crazy. Like Sarah saying, the same if you're in Spain or other countries where and same with Ecuador. It's, if you are married to somebody, you are a family unit with their children in that country. It was prior to one of the positive changes that has come out of the recent announcements in December, and probably the only one, is that they've taken child dependent application out of the policy. So if my stepdaughters, when we came here, one of them was under 18. If it had been a situation where we wanted to bring her here, then we would have had to have paid. She'd had to have been sponsored as well, which would have gone from 18,600 to about just over £22,000. So when it's a stepchild or adopted child, then you need to sponsor them too. Now that's gone. So that is the only positive I think that's come from any of the changes.
Something I find perplexing is that it's hard for me to understand how this policy generates votes. I mean, what do people say on the stump to the folks who are listening when they talk about this policy? Do they say things like, "We've done this, and because we've done it, you should vote for me"? Is that what they say?
No. What's actually going? What the major problem is? People don't actually know it's a problem. So Sarah wouldn't have known about this. People pre-Brexit and post-Brexit until sort of more recently, when the reality is starting to sink in. People had no idea that this was a route that had to be taken to settle here in the UK with your cross-border family. So when immigration is spoken about, invariably your mind will go to all the boats, all illegal immigrants, and all that horrible stuff.
But that's
we're close to.
That's what begs the question, right? In the light of what you've just said, where are the votes that accrue from this policy? I mean, I just don't get it. Help me here, Sarah. I mean,
so I think from just from general comments on Twitter from other people, mostly people are supportive in comments and don't agree with this policy, but the ones that do agree with it, they don't have people like me in mind. They think of British citizens, people who are British citizens that have maybe only been in the UK for 5 years and gained citizenship. And they think of them going back to their country and marrying and bringing other people in, which for me, that's perfectly okay. I think that they have every right to do that. But lots of people think that they shouldn't, that they're just bringing in more people that they don't consider to be British. And I heard somebody say to me that people like me were just collateral damage in order to stop those other situations of people bringing spouses into the UK. Also, people think that there are sham marriages now, that people are just marrying British people in order to get a visa to come to the UK, which when you look at what you actually have to do to prove that you're married in order to get the visa, it would be pretty much impossible for anybody to do that. So it's just misinformation.
Let me see, I understand. People have actually said to you, we regard you as collateral damage. Is that what they've said to you?
Yeah, so they say it's unfortunate that it affects people like me, but in order to keep other people out that they don't want in, then that's just tough luck, basically.
God, we've sunk to a very low state, haven't we? I mean, this is just awful.
That is nothing compared to, and it is a lot to you. And I'm not sort of saying that because it's horrible to hear any of that stuff. But in terms of the evilness, which you would have seen, Sarah, as well, that is actually said on social media about people who are like Sarah, who are putting their head above a parapet. It's very brave to do that, to speak out about something that's to do with immigration. The vitriol and the ignorance that comes back on social media, it makes your toes curl, and you're there biting your hand going, don't say anything, just giving oxygen, because there's so much hate for immigrants. It's horrible, isn't it, Sarah?
And it is, and I don't experience that quite so much because my husband's Italian, he's white, so they don't express that quite so much towards us. But I know of other people that I've seen, and I've lost hours arguing with people on Twitter that have said some really, really horrendous things about the spouses of British people if they happen to be Black or from the global South. It's really, really shocking the way that they're seen, that they're treated.
I don't want to get into any cod psychology here, because I guess I may be wrong here, but I suspect none of us are trained psychiatrists or psychologists. But what is it you think motivates this vitriol? I mean, what do people get from it? I just don't understand it, frankly. I mean, what do they get out of being nasty this way?
I think there's just your nasty keyboard warriors that just sort of sit behind, and they're it's easy to have a pop at somebody when you're doing a message, and you could be this, if you've got a fake profile, you got a fake picture, all that kind of stuff. And it's just, I think there's a lot of fear. There's a lot of, because there's so much negativity around people taking your jobs, people taking the National Health Service, that real protectionism around Great Britain, and this sort of ideal of what this country once was. And I've heard some comments, of people of older generations who don't like the way the country's gone, and I'm just like, oh, okay. But the way that the narrative that is talked about by the government and by the press, certain press, is all to incite hate and othering and blaming for situations that actually aren't anything to do with immigration or the immigrants coming in, the vulnerable immigrants who are coming in, bearing in mind, without getting too, for me, I find it horrendous that we get involved in other countries and their situations, and then when people who are from those countries desperately trying to find safety and refuge come here, they're treated horrendously by certain sectors of there's no safe routes for them to get here, and there is just this abhorrent mentality and this fear. It's this gaslighting, this everything that's going wrong is because immigrants are coming into this country. This whole the boats thing, the fact that was like one of the key policies that the current government spoke out about, even just using those phrases, it's horrendous. We're talking about human beings who are at a point where they are willing to risk their lives to come to this country. And so everything gets pulled into this horrible quagmire of nastiness. And
some people might say, though, and this is a question particularly for you right now, Sarah, because you're actually in Italy. I mean, people sometimes say, yeah, but it's not peculiar to the UK. If you go to Italy and other places, you'll find there's a right-wing grouping of some kind that doesn't like foreigners and thinks it should be Italy for Italians. Have you ever come across that?
Yeah, definitely in Italy. There is a lot of anti-immigrant feeling, probably just as bad as in the UK. So it's definitely a Europe-wide problem. It's not just unique to the UK. At least Italy believes that that families should be together. They're a bit more supportive of the family, so they don't include families in their other migration policies. But I think it comes down to fear. Basically, people scared of losing their way of life, of losing something, and then that fear is preyed upon by the media, by politicians, in order to get their narrative across. So,
have you been affected by any of this sentiment in Italy?
Not really, because it's generally directed towards Black or brown people, not towards white people. So for Italians, it's okay for me to be here, even though I'm an immigrant. They like to call British immigrants expats, but I'm an immigrant the same as anybody else. But I'm certainly not treated that way by most Italians, even though really there's absolutely no difference. So.
It is an irony, though. I mean, I find it too that the word expat it seems to have been coined to somehow avoid the word immigrant. You know, it's you know, people say, well, I'm not an immigrant, I'm an expat. I just happen to choose to live there. And you think, well, hold on a second. That doesn't
an economic migrant.
Exactly. You know, you're still living off the country that you're in. I mean, by definition, you are, because you're using services and all the rest of it. It just seems somewhat bizarre, but these euphemisms somehow help people to deal with difficult situations. Whereas what you're describing is situations where, you know, families are sundered because somebody feels that they can grab a few more votes by doing so. And this, it just feels, apart from the impact on you, which I can't even begin to fully estimate, it just feels tacky. You know, listening to you, that's my sense of it, is this is just so tacky to spend all that time and effort and energy pursuing people like this. For what to what end? I mean, who benefits at the end of the day? It's not at all apparent to me. And to have people say to you, well, yeah, I understand, but you should see yourself as collateral damage. Why should you say to anyone, I regard you as collateral damage? It's debasing to everyone involved, and particularly the person who says that to you. It seems to me they've debased themselves. You know. Anyway, I could go on forever. And sorry, we've almost run out of time. Very, very quickly, Caroline, do you want to say something very quickly before we close? Anything you'd like to say to the audience?
I mean, just to say a couple of things. when I was on BBC Politics Live, one of the Conservative MPs flagged how housing was going to be an issue, and I just thought, oh, okay, here we go. And he literally, there we go, gaslighting again.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, no, that's not, because these are families coming in. But equally, it was just that chucking anything at it. But just, I think the thing for us is that the numbers of, even the impact assessment that hasn't reared its head yet, but what we have had is a very tiny paragraph that talks about how 10 to 30,000 people might be impacted by these rules, but actually the numbers are so small compared to the rest of immigration, but the impacts are massive. And we're not talking short-term impacts, we're talking that this is happening to children. Exactly. That has potential to have long-term damage, and equally for adults, the mental health issues are.
I agree.
Not underestimate the impact.
Thank you both. I really appreciate you giving up your time on a Wednesday night. It's very, very helpful of you. Thank you so much. I'm just going to make a few concluding remarks. If you can stay on the line afterwards, I'd appreciate it, just very briefly.
Thank you.
Well, there we are, folks. Another great show, I'm sure you'll agree, and I'm sure from Sarah and Caroline, and big thanks to both of them. You probably learned a lot more about the very opaque world of the way families are sundered in order to, as I put it, grub a few votes here and there. And to say to somebody your collateral damage is outrageous. So a big thanks to all of you out there for joining us tonight. I hope you've enjoyed the show. As ever, we have a formidable list of guests lined up for future shows. You'll see the details on independencelive.net. Look out for the show next week, please, which features David Powell. And we'll be talking about special enterprise zones. Now, you may think special enterprise zones, that sounds terribly opaque. It's not. It's terribly important. It's a way of taking democracy and putting it to one side. And we've all learned tonight how crucial that can be. So to all of you, thanks for joining us. Stay safe, take care, and don't forget the crowdfunder, please. Good night.